Every war is the same. Suffering and death tolls at the millions, destruction and violence everywhere you look. When it ends, the winners themselves are a tough spot, and the losers are sometimes destroyed for decades trying to rebuild what they lost. As you can see, even decades after World War II, the Axis nations were still lagging behind. Wait, no. In 1990, the economies of both Japan and Germany were already larger than both the United Kingdom and France, with Italy right behind. In fact, in 1989, just before the reunification which messed up Germany's economic output per capita somewhat, Italy, Germany, and Japan all had a higher GDP than France and the UK on a per capita basis. How did the biggest losers in the World War grow back to such strength only a few decades later so as to actually surpass the winners? The obvious answer is that all those countries experienced some of the largest economic miracles in modern history throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But this is just using two words for the same thing. The question still remains of why those economic miracles happened in the first place. It was obviously not due to the Marshall Plan, as many believe, since many other nations also profited from it and did not have the same outcomes as these countries. Another argument, which I like better, is that it's easier to rebuild than to reform. That is, since they were starting from scratch, it was easier to modernize industry and infrastructure than countries like France and the United Kingdom, which had part of it preserved. Their political systems were brand new and more adaptable, with less bureaucracy from previous administrations. They could also afford to pay lower wages to their poor populations, which better competed in international markets. The creation of the European community might also have contributed to that. But the answer also might be found in the period before the war. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, the US, through its laissez-faire capitalism, grew at a higher rate than virtually any other country in the world. The US was the largest player in the defeats of both Japan and Italy. In Germany, it was influential, but there was also a large part played by the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. Given America's global dominance and its key influence on how the Axis states were to be rebuilt, it makes sense that their political and economical principles and structure would be somewhat mirrored in those countries. So, whereas England and France kept to some of possibly outdated structures inherited from colonial Europe, Germany, Japan, and Italy could more quickly adapt to a US centric world of capitalism, multinationals, and international trade. This can be very easily observed with the amount of multinationals that emerged out of those three countries after the Second World War. As impressive as this growth was, what was even more impressive was the slowdown that came after it. First Japan in the 1990s, then Italy in the 2000s, and finally Germany in the 2010s. Their economic output per capita has been steadily declining in comparison to the US, and in the case of Italy and Japan, already fallen behind France and the United Kingdom. The reason for this is a bit more clear to me: the aging population. Very few countries are so late in the demographic transition as those three. Another thing to consider is how the political structure is molded by the beliefs of the reigning society. Those societies were always very collectivist, which is why they fell to authoritarianism in the first place. Having an outside force impose free markets and decentralization on them could only work if the peoples of these nations actually agreed that that was the best course of action, and the fact is that they largely didn't. So gradually, the politics grew back to an inflated, overarching welfare state, which they have to this day. Of course, those are all hypotheses, so I'd like to hear, why do you think all those countries grew so fast, while others didn't? And why do you believe that the growth has suddenly stopped now?